Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Aeolian Sands. My name's John Ivanduke. In this podcast, we'll be discovering how people in the UAE explore the natural world. We'll dive into that in our big, bold question as we continue our seasonal look into environment and nature. There's a lot of remakes, not us. We're thoroughly original. We're talking about cinema. We'll chat about that in our In the News bit. And avoiding detection, we'll finish the podcast with Under the Radar, where we'll be chatting about what's shiny in the world of glitter. But before all that, let me welcome in a far wiser head than mine, Mir. What's new in your world?
Busy. Travel, lots of work. But I'm excited about this one. Let's get into it.
Yeah, it's a busy summer for us over at duke+mir Towers, and we've been spending a lot of time actually looking at environment and nature in the UAE. And if you've not downloaded our white paper, Environment Action in the UAE, you can get on over to www.duke+mir.com, or maybe even just skip the W's. You'll find it in the research section of our website. Now, this week's big bold question, we asked people how they spend their time in nature, and specifically which activities they spend at least 30 minutes doing each week. Now, one of the big findings from this was that less than half of people spend time in green spaces each week. Now, obviously, we did define green spaces as things like a public or a neighborhood park, a nature reserve, etc. But it's quite concerning, I think, purely because spending time in nature has been very well associated with health. Mir, it's quite an interesting finding and something which we will dig a little bit deeper into. Why do you think people don't spend time in nature?
There are a couple of aspects. Number one would be just accessibility and where we are in this part of the world, weather. I think being outdoors, as we know, is quite challenging. For example, right now it's 46 so degrees, feels like 52. So it's a bit warm to be out in a park or by the beach. So that's definitely one thing that people find it challenging to spend more time in green spaces or outdoors. But then also I think accessibility, how close people are or how easy it is for them to access public parks. Some areas better than others, some emirates better than others, but I think we have some interesting data in terms of as we dive deeper into the different cohorts of the UAE residents and where they're spending their time.
Yeah, we did look into proximity of public parks and community parks in terms of people saying that they did spend time in green spaces, and it was definitely a factor. Around 60% of those who were within a 15-minute walk to a public park were frequent users of green spaces, and 40% were near to community parks. So I think that definitely is a factor to play into it. You mentioned weather. It is worth caveating that this report, the survey, took place in April. So that is quite important to identify that the time of year was a little bit cooler than the hottest of summer months. But I think, if we did do this at different times of year, maybe we would see a fluctuation. And I'm sure you'd find the same if you were in the UK or Europe, where in the winter months perhaps you'd be spending less time outside. Yeah. So that is definitely something, seasonality. Now, young people were least likely to spend time in green spaces like parks than older generations. So just 41% of Gen Z spend time in the green outdoors. That compares to more than 53% of 45 years and older. Why do you think young people perhaps were not such fans of spending time outdoors?
That's really interesting also because I found another recent survey, and I'm going to pronounce it the way I read it, but then you can correct my pronunciation. Derbyshire in
Derbyshire.
the UK. Derbyshire, okay, yeah. So they found that 7 out of 10 young people are worried about climate change and face climate anxiety, and that's due to not being more in the outdoors.
Really?
So the lack of access to green space, and it basically, there's a lot of studies and academic research that that highlights the benefits of being outdoors in green spaces. Everything from mental health to mood, depression. There's some studies that also talk about it slows down aging. So there are a lot of benefits, but it's quite interesting that younger people are not spending as much time as they should be outdoors, and hence that could also correlate to their attitudes towards climate change.
Yeah, and you mentioned mental health a little bit there. There was a study a few years ago in the Frontiers of Psychology. I'm sure many people listening would just dive into that on a regular basis. They found that as little as 20 minutes outside, whether it's spent exercising or just sitting around in that space and absorbing the natural environment, can significantly lower the stress hormones. So young people, more anxiety, perhaps you just need to get outside a little bit more. But what we did find is that 18 to 24-year-olds were far more likely to go into the desert. Obviously, we've got lots of desert around in the UAE and Saudi Arabia and all across the peninsula. But a far higher likelihood. It was nearly double the likelihood of going into the desert compared to older age groups. 25 and 34-year-olds, obviously, and 35 to 44-year-olds that were studied within this research. They also spent a lot of time in the desert too, more than a quarter of those. However, I can't see why it would flip. I don't know why young people would spend more time in the desert than in a green space.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I think it's because maybe perhaps when people go to the desert, it's more of a group activity and they want to do things collectively. So they usually go to a large group.
Camping, social occasions, yeah.
They tend to spend longer there. So it's 4 hours, 5 hours. It's free. So again, you don't have to, if you want to, like you mentioned, have a birthday or celebrate, graduation or a party or anything. Relatively, there's a lot of space to be accessed. Perhaps that's the reason why they prefer the desert.
Yeah, it's a good point. And looking a little bit further into some of the other stats that came out from this question, we had 16% of people who frequently go hiking in the mountains or the hills. 12% do falconry or hunting. 13% do horse riding. And 21% do water activities, so things like boating or kayaking. Now, as a rule of thumb, though, the more that you earn, so this was a sort of demographic finding, the more you earn, the more likely you are to spend time doing activities outdoors or spend time in nature. As part of the development of the UAE, perhaps we need to ensure that people of all incomes have access to these kind of green spaces or places where people can enjoy outdoors.
Yeah, there are multiple studies, mostly from the US, but also from the UK, about low-income households, unfortunately having less access. So they're further away from green spaces. And if there is a green space, they often have to share it with more people just because of the pure density. So I think that is a key kind of important decision for urban planners and people who are really driving these policies and initiatives to think about. So I think the stat out of England was 38% of England don't have a green or blue space within 15 minutes walk from their home. That's like around, I think, 3 million or so people. So it's actually quite important. And this was further highlighted during the pandemic when there were lockdowns. So a lot of people wanted to be outside because they were pretty much locked into their homes.
Yeah.
And they unfortunately did not have that access. And as you mentioned, there are numerous studies in terms of the health benefits of being outdoors, being around a green space or a space that has water.
Now, there were some changes when it comes to the different places within the Emirates. So Abu Dhabi residents were most likely to spend time in green spaces, but they were the least likely to go to the beach. That went to Sharjah residents, who had the highest proportion who regularly go to the beach. And it was actually surprising to me. One of the findings was that when it comes to nationality demographic, more Emiratis and Arab expats by proportion said that they were going to go to the beach every week. versus Westerners, who was actually quite a low percentage. I thought that was quite surprising, because I thought Westerners would want to be getting a tan.
Yeah, that is surprising. But I guess, I mean, it's interesting, right? And that's why we've conducted this survey, because it's really, really kind of interesting and sparks curiosity in terms of what the habits and preferences are of these different age groups, of different ethnicities, of different incomes. And I think the more this data gets in the hands of people that are really driving those kind of decisions in terms of how to plan cities, how to make strategic changes to neighborhoods and different communities, can really address the kind of problems that people would face, and could really help in terms of public health, mental health, getting people to exercise. We know obesity is a big problem, type 1 diabetes. It's so getting younger people, older people, families, everyone out is just going to make the community stronger. But also, I think what's important to note is the correlation between being out in nature and also having a better understanding of the environment and nature, and hence participating in more pro-environment or sustainable practices. If you're out in a park, you would notice that you would feel bad that there's a piece of garbage, let's say, lying on the grass, versus possibly if you're just walking down the street, you see it everywhere, right? So I think that's also very important. The more people are out in nature, they're doing outdoor activities, the more likely or inclined they're going to be to care about the environment around them, to care about birds and different animals within those environments as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think we're quite lucky in some ways that when we walk around environments within the UAE, in the kind of urban centres, we don't necessarily see that much in the way of litter. Compare that to perhaps walking around in a city in the UK, you're going to see trash all over the ground in certain areas. Here, I think we're quite blessed. There's obviously a big sort of municipal cleanup teams that do a great job, probably unsung heroes, and we only really paid attention, I think, to them when it was the pandemic, and we saw actually how many of them are and how great a job they do cleaning up the streets during the lockdown period. And it was actually quite good thing to see, and they really contributed in a tough time for the nation. One thing I would say is that when you go in the kind of city areas, you don't necessarily see that litter. But if you go into the mountains, if you go into any of the kind of public spaces which are perhaps away from the diligent eyes of the authorities, sometimes you do see nature, and I particularly point out camping sites. Yeah, people just leave their trash. Yeah, there's waste everywhere, and that kind of attitude. I think it has to be a cultural thing. You have to have been instilled from a young age. Do not litter. Do not put the rubbish on the ground. Take it away with you. If you're not taught that, if you're not learning that from the generations above you, then you're going to continue the bad habits of your forefathers. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think over here we're very blessed, as you mentioned, to live in a very well maintained city and country, right? Yeah. We have great, fantastic infrastructure, and as you mentioned, I can't even imagine how it is for the countless people that work at the municipalities to make sure that the streets and neighborhoods are clean. But very interesting that you mentioned about culture. When I was recently in Russia, I learned we were going to visit a friend, and this was during the work week. In Russia, by law, it's each company once a month, all the employees have to actually, during a work day, has to take that day off. And as a company together, they have specific zones in terms of where their company is registered or where their office is, and they have to actually go out and clean. So public parks, they have to pick up litter, they have to sort out, for example, recycling. So that's kind of
ingrained within, and they learn this from a very early age. The same happens in schools. So, I mean, I think this has been carried on since the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I can see the you know, that kind of community aspect of being socially responsible for certain things and being the collective. I can see why that would hark back to sort of political regimes of times gone by in that country. But yeah, I was thinking how when you were sort of saying about, you know, collective cleanups, here they do have them, but they tend to be focused on the beaches.
Yeah, it goes back to different cultural aspects as well. Some people, I've been to places like you mentioned, hiking. When I've been hiking up in Fujairah in Ras Al Khaimah, and unfortunately you do see people that leave over trash, you know, and for example, where I live now on Sheikh Zayed, that's a new community that's just built, right? And over there, because it's in between Sheikh Zayed and Satwa, obviously you have a mass amount of people in Satwa, right? And then you have a lot of people in Sheikh Zayed, and kind of they flow over. Since it's a new development, it's been, I think, like 9 months, or maybe more than 9 months. 10 months ago, I wrote to Dubai municipality, because you see a lot of trash, right, everywhere. But then also there are not enough bins. So where do people throw, you know, if you have to walk 20 minutes before you see the first bin where you can throw your trash, you know, it kind of incentivizes someone to just look the other way and throw, you know, their coffee cup or whatever when they're cleaning out their car, just to kind of leave the trash on the side. And it just seems kind of counterintuitive. Then you have this army of Dubai municipality cleaners that every day are constantly, you know, cleaning and picking up this trash that's being left over, as opposed to just installing bins at every, you know, 500 meters or so.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like we had some great comment, and it's well worth looking into the report, the insights report that we created over at duke+mir.com, where we had some fantastic insight from the team over at the beer group. They gave some great insights, and we were very blessed actually that they were going to contribute to our report, and hopefully we'll be hearing a little bit more about that in due course this season. Now, one of the other areas was metaverse. And this is obviously going to be a big thing in the coming years, or so we're promised, and especially I think with the announcement of Vision Pro next year from Apple, I'm sure it's going to only intensify the focus on Web3 environments and metaverse. But is it going to be inclusive? One interesting result from the duke+mir study is the disparity between high earners and lower income household when it comes to spending time in the metaverse. We found that 24% of higher earners said they spent at least 30 minutes doing metaverse activities, compared to just 8% of those earning 10,000 dirhams or less. So effectively, you are 3 times more likely to spend time in the metaverse as a higher income earner than a lower income.
Yeah. Again, the price of the technology, right? Right now, the price is considerably high. To be able to access it, to buy the different experiences, you know, so it's the adoption curve is not there yet. And I think as the technology gets cheaper, perhaps you'll see more adoption. But I think kind of another, you know, study also showed, again, I'm going back to like the international studies, it's not only actually physically being out in green spaces, but even watching visuals or pictures of green spaces and nature, listening to nature sounds, that also has a positive effect.
Really?
So possibly there could be some of the studies that they did in terms of watching pictures or watching video or listening to sounds, or a combination of 3, they had a reduction of around 9% when it came to chronic disorders such as hypertension, blood pressure. So even if you do not have access, right, you know, watch Planet Earth, listen to the sounds of birds or the ocean.
Wow.
You know, that could also help. So potentially there could be, especially for those areas that possibly are not as close to public spaces or green spaces, you know, technology could help but the barrier to entry at the moment is price.
I'm quite blessed because in my home office, we have a lot of plants outside, and get a lot of birds sort of coming in and hovering, hummingbirds and the like, and definitely that helps with my mood.
Yeah.
Even if it's spending a few minutes looking out of the window and seeing that kind of environment, I do think that helps with my own relaxed nature when I'm in a working environment. And I find it fascinating because you mentioned that it doesn't necessarily have to be actually in environment. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing that we're saying that, because people might then just sort of stick on some bird noises on Spotify, and I'm holding my hands up. I've definitely played bird sounds on and nature sounds on Spotify or other music channels on my phone when doing different things. But with the Vision Pro, one of the things that was sort of getting critical attention was that it's promoting mental health and well-being by strapping on a headset. And my natural reaction to that was, well, that's I mean, how can they say that? People need to go outside, they need to go into nature. But if you're saying that the studies have shown that even doing that in a digital realm, maybe we won't even get people going into our physical world around us. They'll just be exploring natural environments with headsets. And that scares me, because it means that this wonderful world that we are so lucky to be living on, chance of billions for us to be here now in this very space and time as ourselves, and have this great planet, which is beautiful and vast and incredible, that people may choose not to look after that world and instead curate environments on other platforms. There are definitely space for those kind of worlds, from all sorts of gaming to having fantastic office environments. We're very lucky to have a client who's in the Web3 world, and they're doing amazing things, incredible things.
Yeah.
But I also think we very much need to look after the world that we live in.
But kind of just look at it from another perspective, it's the technology is an enabler. Imagine, you could pretty much take your whole office and sit on a park bench, and you could work from there. Imagine it could augment your experience of being in the outdoors. So you're going on a hike. It could educate you about the different flora, fauna, So again, I think they're both sides of it. Time will tell in terms of how that experience renders. But I think what's important is that people do spend time engaging with nature. Clearly, there are a lot of health benefits. So save yourself some money by spending more time. They recommend, so most of the studies recommend at least 2 hours a week. 2 hours a month. So that's 30 minutes a week. Spend time outdoors. There was another study which of women. They studied women that lived in a certain area, and they looked at that data for around 8 years. And using satellite imagery, they compared the areas which had more greenery where these women lived versus less greenery. And it showed a 12% lower rate of mortality. So, you want to live longer, you want to live healthier, just be around greenery, trees, ponds, nature, be outdoors, do fun things with your friends and family.
So hold on. Just by being close to nature, you've got a lower chance of dying.
Correct. Mortality. It's studies have found reverse aging, so it slows down aging. It significantly lowers rates of anxiety, depression, overall life satisfaction. Masdar did a study in partnership with the National. In that survey, they found 65% of the respondents said that green public space in their city added to their personal happiness. So it makes you happier. So a lot of benefits, right? And the best thing about it, it's free.
Yeah, and one of the things I love the concept of ikigai.
Yeah.
The Japanese concept, what a book that I was reading about this, they were talking about these. They're called the blue zones, where people live incredibly long times. And they were looking particularly at people who lived more than 100 years old, and there's certain spots around the world which have that. One of the things that they all have in common is that they all spend time outdoors, and quite frequently they share certain things, like they either gardeners or fishermen, and they actually spending that time in nature. I can now see, hey, there is something in this mortality rate that you may live longer, because it's definitely a common factor in those areas of the world where people live the longest. Now, obviously, farming, fishing, gardening, spending time outdoors. One thing though is that jobs outside do try and kill us.
Yeah, but at least
if you're a forester,
or a lumberjack.
You don't get too many chainsaws, right?
Deadliest catch.
in an office job.
Yeah, exactly. But at least you won't die.
Exactly, deadliest catch. Yeah. All these programs where you see, like, hey, these guys are working incredibly difficult jobs outdoors, and you're way more likely to die than if you're in an
At least you won't die of a natural cause, right? Like obesity.
A chainsaw to the head is not very natural.
Yeah, but
farming with a big old combine harvester. I was reading something the other day about how it was talking about rural jobs, and how everyone who's lived in the countryside or rural jobs, they all know someone who's accidentally run over themselves with a tractor, or they may be fallen through ice when they've been fishing, or things like that. So jobs outside do try and kill us, but perhaps if you can avoid being, having a horrific demise, then maybe it's all good for you in the long run. Now, metaverse is one form of digital entertainment where we obviously be spending our time. Perhaps we might be spending more time in metaverse than in natural environments in the future. And maybe we're spending our time and money in that realm as well. But what about another favorite pastime? Cinema. After the jingles, we'll be heading to the movies. Right, it's time for In the News. This week, it's all about films, movies, and cinema. Is it cinema? Is it theatre? Do you go to a cinema, or do you go to a theatre?
Cinema.
A cinema, yeah. I go to a cinema, but if you're in the States, you'd be going to a theatre, right?
Yeah, because I think it was theatre, and then they call it movie theatre, and now they just call it the movies, right? We're going to the movies. I think that's a very American thing. But there's also a spelling difference as well for theatre, right?
Yeah.
Ending in R-E or E-R.
Oh, don't get into spellings between UK and US. That's a whole different tangent. And then there's film and movie as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think probably Brits say film.
Do they?
Rather than movie.
Okay. Well, you guys say...
nobody's calling it moving pictures anymore, right?
Thank God.
One thing really caught our attention recently, and to get into the In the News section, it was the announcement of yet another remake. This time it was Chronicles of Narnia. Greta Gerwig, who made the latest Barbie movie, is set to direct a couple of remake films of the C.S. Lewis classic. It got us thinking, why are there so many remakes of old classics, and why bother?
I mean, it's a very interesting question. I think it's proven, right? They've got a proven script, character, plot.
Everyone's familiar with it.
Yeah, they just
There's nostalgia.
They need to adapt it, and I think you kind of have to see it's creativity versus guaranteed return, right? They know that it's going to work. They just need to adapt it, modernize it, and possibly, that's why studios are in the business of remakes, and we've got quite a few.
Loads
in recent time. I kind of went through some numbers. Again, these are old numbers, but in 2017, 41 of 50 of the highest grossing movies were either a sequel, a reboot, or a remake. And of the 29 films that grossed over $1 billion, 7 of them were remakes. So it's proven ROI. They for studios, that's what they're going to put their money on.
Yeah, and you see it as well with the creation of things like prequels and obviously sequels to classics, and remaking them is another way. Narnia got me thinking though, because in my head it wasn't that long ago since those last Narnia films. You might recall them. Liam Neeson voiced Aslan, the lion, or Aslan. Tilda Swinton was the White Witch, and then there were a bunch of kids who were pretty typecast after that and haven't appeared in anything else. It does seem that there's tons of nostalgic films being made. I think Disney is behind a lot of them. The remakes we're seeing of those kind of Disney films as live action reboots, and one of the reasons, when we were sort of diving a little bit deeper into the reasoning behind this, was intellectual property. So remaking something is cheaper than buying the rights to something new, and most of the films that have been made, if you've got that IP, your characters are protected in those kind of Marvel or Disney franchise kind of movies. I was looking actually at how many Disney is making, and they're rebooting everything. And maybe, well, why is Disney going into this live action remake? And actually, if you look at the films that they're doing, they have a good reason for doing the live action remakes, and this is to protect the ownership of those films. Every 70 years or so, they have to find new ways of protecting that intellectual property, because by making a new version of that film with perhaps a slightly different plot line, they're protecting the franchise. They're actually protecting their rights to those films. So all those classic cartoons, yes, part of it's to do with nostalgia, part of it's to do with it's a safe bet, make lots of money from something everybody has. Parents may have seen these originals, for example, Little Mermaid, when they were growing up, and now they want their kids to follow in that story. They know it's a safe storyline. So there's lots of different reasons, but Disney has a strong reason for protecting their thing from a legal sense as well. And funnily enough, the most famous Disney character of all, Mickey Mouse, his first film, Steamboat Willie.
What year was that?
I think it was his first film. Anyway, this was it would have been 95 years ago.
Wow. In
January 2024. Now, the Mickey Mouse copyright is due to expire on that film in next January, in January 2024. 95 years after that first short animated film with Mickey Mouse, and it means that Disney's that particular film from Disney goes into the public domain. But you think, well, fantastic, everyone can take this and do what they want with it, but you can imagine Disney's got some fantastic lawyers, right?
Yeah.
So you try and do something with Mickey Mouse, that's not going to happen. They still have the character trademark.
Yeah, and probably every version of him throughout the years, right?
Every version. So if what you perhaps and not to get too much into it, because I'm not the expert in this realm, but it's interesting to see that basically, yes, this particular Steamboat Willie may go into the public domain, but pretty much everything else to do with it won't. Similar, in a few years from now, there could be copyright contention over characters like Pluto, Donald Duck, and it even goes so far as very, very high up in government that Disney has pushed this in the past. That it's gone to this kind of thing has gone to Congress. Originally, the works were meant to be going into public domain after 56 years after their creation.
But they lobbied to
lobbied, and eventually, the copyright was extended a couple of different times. But the character, ultimately, Mickey Mouse, is a registered character trademark, and it will definitely be protected, because I'm sure that is, even though we haven't seen too many Mickey Mouse films recently from Disney, I'm sure are hugely profitable for them. Yeah,
but I think most of the remakes that Disney's been doing of these old cartoons, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, they've all been live action movies, which I find, and they're not going, I guess, the animated route, because I guess that's more Pixar, perhaps.
I don't know. I suppose Disney has gone down that route of live action. I don't know if it's necessarily a deviation away from the fact that I suppose animations cost a lot, don't they? You have to have a massive teams. You just have to look at the credits at the end of animated films, and they are massively long. And I guess that there may be something in that too. Looking at there was a bit of a conversation, I think it was from Matt Damon, the actor, around why there's so many remakes and why studios are going down those kind of routes. And it was we were sort of talking about how there's the studios are more risk averse now. They want guaranteed profit. They're not necessarily taking the creative risks. And I think there's this comparison I found when I was researching this, and somebody was comparing it to the US car industry, and they were saying that the moment that the US car industry stopped being creative, stopped innovating, it saw a decline. And I wonder whether perhaps there is something even bigger at play here, and that is that there isn't that investment in innovation. There isn't necessarily the same degree of creativity by making a remake or a prequel or a sequel. Perhaps, therefore, that Hollywood, could we even be seeing a decline in Hollywood?
Yeah, I mean, but it's true of any industry, right? If you stifle innovation and, the funding doesn't go to support a broad spectrum of ideas and concepts. I mean, you see it within the kind of the world that we operate in, with tech startups. Climate tech gets a fraction of what, let's say, fintech would get, right, in terms of funding. You could argue both are equally important and the same. I'd assume that independent filmmakers and artists find it harder to get their films funded for the producers and studios to pick up their films.
Yep.
And I think that's why perhaps there are so many remakes. I was just going through like a list because, kind of researching. There's so many movies that I actually didn't even know were remakes. Like so many movies, and most of them are like from the 50s or from the 60s, some from the 80s. We just kind of know the ones that we've seen in our lifetime. But yeah, there's a huge volume of movies, and I guess that's that's more of the industry or the consumer part of it, right? There's a whole plethora of films that come out every year, independent movies that you and I probably would never even hear about unless we were super into filmmaking. But unfortunately, it's the kind of big box office movies that we see and that everybody sees, and remakes seem to be a safe bet. Same goes for reboots or sequels.
Yeah, I've seen a great sequel recently, the new Indiana Jones film. I was a huge fan of the original three, less so the Crystal Skull one. That wasn't so great for me, but this one, I think Harrison Ford's in rip roaring form in the latest one. Looking at those remakes though, like remakes and good ones versus bad ones. Casino Royale was a great remake of a classic, but with I think a different storyline to the original, if I'm not mistaken. But then there's awful ones. And no disrespect to Nicolas Cage, because he's obviously an incredibly popular and famous actor. But The Wicker Man, the remake of The Wicker Man, absolutely dreadful compared to the original. I mean, there's I dread to think what the score would be on Rotten Tomatoes for that one.
You'd be surprised. Might be good. People love Nick Cage.
Nah, I mean, everyone loves Nick Cage.
He has a cult following. Yeah.
Of course, everyone loves Nick Cage. He's been in some great films, but The Wicker Man, nah. The Karate Kid, obviously been remade recently. How can you remake The Karate Kid?
It was okay.
How can you remake that?
But you think because Karate Kid's from our time, and we have like
old nostalgia,
old nostalgia, and probably if we went back and watched Karate Kid now, we'd be like, I'm not sure why did I love this movie so much.
Well, they've obviously got the Netflix series now as well.
Oh really? I haven't seen that.
They've brought back the characters as well. I thought one of the worst remakes as well, even though I love the actors in it. And it wasn't dreadful in terms of if you'd never seen the original, but it was The Italian Job. The Italian Job's an absolute classic.
Yeah.
And
they ruined that one.
They just decimated it. It was pieces of the original. And then there's others as well, and perhaps sometimes it's an advantage. How are they really going to are kids going to watch black and white versions of King Kong? I'm not sure they are.
No.
So maybe introducing some of those incredible monumental characters from times gone by, perhaps it can be a good thing for introducing these kind of things to younger generations. And as you say, to loop it to the Disney remakes, they're bringing characters that kind of have it's a tale as old as time.
Barbie. I mean, Barbie's coming out, so that's something that I think is a dying idea. I'm not even sure. We should have actually checked how are the sales of Barbie dolls going?
Oh, dude,
in the
Barbie's
current
massive.
In the current environment.
It's huge. And I have to say, I have a beautiful young daughter, and I have to admit, I have watched Barbie, and not only that, I've enjoyed the TV series Barbie. Yeah. It's pretty solid. It's good stuff. If you're late at night trying to trying to get a baby back to sleep, or
growing up with two sisters, I played with a lot of Barbies as a kid as well. So I'll be looking forward to watching this film. See if they do justice.
From the glittering lights of Hollywood to quite literal shiny sparkles in Under the Radar, we'll be talking about glitter. Now, all that glitters is not gold. It's a wonderful aphorism, one that's often wrongly attributed to Shakespeare, as for all fans of the Bard know, it was actually all that glisters is not gold in the Merchant of Venice. But that takes us off on a totally different tangent, as we really do want to concentrate on glitter. Mir, tell me more about this week's Under the Radar topic.
Well, I love a good conspiracy theory, and
who doesn't?
Yeah, and this has been I actually never knew about this, but recently on my feed on TikTok, there have been a few videos that I saw about, and I got really interested. So it's what's called the glitter conspiracy. And this apparently has been going on for about, a few years, since 2017. The rabbit hole that is the internet, different Reddit threads, discussion boards, social investigators have been trying to figure out what is glitter, who's within the industry, and more importantly, who's the biggest buyer. So this all kind of kicked it off with a New York Times article back in 2018. And they were kind of researching about the glitter industry, and they came across something quite interesting, as they couldn't really pinpoint a mystery customer or a mystery industry that uses glitter. It's been on podcasts. It's really, really deep. And I think now it's come back back on top of the minds of conspiracy theorists and people who like to spend their time kind of seeing pointless things. Is two guys with a YouTube channel, and the channel's called Chuppel, Chuppl. And they just came out with a video, and it's titled "The End to the Glitter Conspiracy." They've uncovered some interesting facts, or at least made progress on finding out more when it comes to the glitter industry.
Just before you go into that section, I just want to give a massive amount of credit to whoever the commissioning editor was at the New York Times, who thought and was pitched by this journalist and said, "Hey, do you want an article on glitter?" And whoever it was, editor at that end, said, "Yeah, sure. That'll really engage our audiences." I mean, it's what a great punt, because it's got us talking.
I mean, honestly, it's amazing, and the story of glitter is as interesting as probably what this journalist went through, right? It was possibly like, hey, I have nothing to write about. I'm going to write about glitter.
All right, tell me more.
But further investigation just led to more questions. So these two guys, they started digging deeper into the origins of glitter, and they found out that the inventor was a gentleman named Henry Rushman, who was a German scientist who moved to America in the 30s. So again, all right, nothing quite interesting there, but they figured out, and they actually were the first people to score an interview with his direct descendant, who is still alive, and they uncovered some interesting things. So firstly, they found out that Mr. Rushman, who apparently invented glitter, had also worked on the Manhattan Project.
Wow.
So he worked alongside.
Links back to our film reference with Oppenheimer.
Shout out. I've already booked my tickets, or I'm gonna black out those dates, so you'll find me in IMAX. Shout out to my boy Nolan. So anyway, so he actually worked alongside Oppenheimer and the team for this secret project, which was called the Manhattan Project, where they were building the atomic bomb. So the interesting thing is, background on Rushman, he was a precision machinist. So he was very, very skilled in terms of precision cutting and using machinery. And that's why the government at that time reached out to him because they needed him for the Manhattan Project. He was working at Kodak, and his job was to cut film. And there was apparently some really technical work that was required in terms of precision cutting. So he was tasked to use this material called mica, right? So mica is a kind of stone, and essentially what he had to do was with his skills in precision machining, he had to create these washers through which the plutonium rods would go through, and that was basically what was going to create this bomb. At that time, he didn't know that he was making glitter, so he never really invented glitter.
And it's worth pointing out that mica's been used for thousands of years as glitter. We're talking, this is more of the kind of modern day plastic, polymer, aluminium, etc., crushed together to form glitter.
He didn't know this at the time, but in the workshop, all the other scientists and engineers at the Manhattan Project, if you're familiar with the Manhattan Project, they also, because it was a secret project, they also all lived together in a gated, guarded, secret town. Right? So all these guys would actually collect all of that glitter from his machine work, and they would take it home, and they would use it in different, give it to their kids to do art. They would throw it on their Christmas trees. And that's kind of the origin of modern day glitter, or that idea that you could use this.
So what's it used for? What's glitter used for that not just like, the kids' paintings? By the way, if you are a parent, like glitter glue or anything to do with glitter is every parent's worst nightmare. Your kid's been using glitter at nursery or school. Yeah. You pick them up. It takes ages to get off. Impossible. By the way, top tip is lint rolls.
To remove glitter.
Lint rolls, that comes off.
You heard real life advice from John on Aeolian Sands. So anyway, after his time at the Manhattan Project, he opened Meadowbrook's Inventions, and he would then produce glitter commercially. So over the years, publicly, what we know is that glitter is used in everything from cosmetics. There are many, many theories, toothpaste, automobile paint, the boating industry. Apparently boats use glitter within their paint, toys, plastics.
Party cannons. If you've been to a party, and there's glitter, you find bits of it on you for weeks. And I guess it probably depends on how good the party is as to where you find that glitter. Yeah,
and unsurprisingly, that in that article in the New York Times, where her interview with the company GlitterX. So there are only two companies in America producing glitter. One is GlitterX, and the other was Meadowbrook's Inventions, where they wouldn't reveal who they were working with or who their mystery customer was. Now we know, because of the interview that these guys did with the descendant of Rushman, was that the military was actually a big buyer through military contractors of glitter.
And what were they using it for?
It's from what he revealed, everything from controlling the burn of rocket fuel. So NASA and different rockets, missiles, to radar material, to anti-radar material, flares, shafts, to brake pads for fighter jets.
Oh yeah, I mean I've seen the latest Top Gun film, and obviously they press a button and
they fire all of that stuff.
Everything goes out the back. I presume that's the kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it's not really glitter, but it's the expertise and the machinery they have in terms of precision cutting to be able to produce these vast variety of materials that clearly have a lot of use cases. But yeah, still kind of still quite interesting, I think. And I'm curious to know how the glitter companies will respond.
Yeah, I saw one thing about it being used in toothpaste, because obviously they banned microbeads. They were banned in these kind of cosmetic and beauty products. And I think glitter is now used within some toothpastes as well. I guess there's certain aspect of glitter, to bring it back to environment and nature. Should it be banned in certain usages? Well, because apparently it can take 1,000 years to biodegrade. Could potentially be seen as bad for the environment because it's a single-use plastic. But now they can actually make biodegradable glitter from either eucalyptus plant with aluminium inside, or from cellulose, both of which can dissolve and be naturally absorbed back into things like soil.
Yeah, I assume that's going to be quite costly, though.
I'm sure much more expensive than the mass production
parents pay the price.
Yeah. Well, that wraps things up for this glittering podcast. Thank you very much for joining us on Aeolian Sands. You can follow us on TikTok. That's at Aeolian Sands. We're also on Instagram at duke_mir. Thank you very much for listening. Join us again on the next episode of Aeolian Sands.